Hi and welcome back to the channel. As a movie buff, I have a very peculiar comfort zone, which is based on where I first started seeing a lot of movies. Now, back in that day, there were no VHS tapes. There wasn't very much on TV as far as cult movies concerned. So I spent a lot of time in cinemas. And 1970s exploitation cinema, therefore, became my comfort zone. And so I decided to give you a double feature of two 1970s exploitation movies, which for me are among the best of their type, and so they make a wonderful double feature. Now, one of the things I found about these movies after I watched them is that the director of one is the producer of the other. Now, I picked these ones out not quite at random, but I picked them out because I liked them both, and they're both from the 1970s. But they have that connection. The director of one's the producer of the other. One was made in England, one was made in Houston, Texas. One slightly more tongue-in-cheek than the other, but they're very much worth checking out. The first of these movies, from 1972, I knew as Deathline, which was the title that it had in Australia. But in America and a lot of other markets, and ultimately here in Australia, it has a different name. Raw Meat. 1972 horror movie starring Donald Pleasance. It's got a cameo by Christopher Lee in it as well. And the ingenues are played by David Ladd and Sharon Gurney. Now, the story is quite interesting and a little bit different for a 1970s British horror film. There's a lot of those Amicus and Hammer period piece movies, but this one's definitely set in contemporary London, and it involves some goings on at a tube station. We see a British businessman in a bowler hat and suit wandering in and out of various seedy sex clubs around Soho, and he ends up taking the last train home in Russell Square tube station. Unfortunately, he doesn't make it home. He's attacked by a strange raggedy man, and he's held prisoner in a disused and collapsed section of the underground train system in London, which collapsed in 1892 and was left abandoned because the company that built it went bankrupt. We find out as the investigation goes on that 8 men and 4 women were left trapped in the tunnels, and over the years they bred and reproduced and lived on whatever they could scrounge, mostly rats. And so the last descendant of these people, 80 years later, is attacking train passengers on late night trains and using them as meat. That's a setup for it. We've got an inbred cannibal living in the underground train line in London. That's really cool, and it's a good setup for a straight up, right down the line horror film. But this one throws us a few twists, and that's what makes it unusual and much more watchable. The first twist is the policeman investigating it is an inspector played by Donald Pleasance. Now, if you don't know Donald Pleasance from anything else, you probably know him from the original Halloween and also for playing the president in Escape from New York. But he had a long career as a character actor in England. He was in Roman Polanski's Cul-de-sac. He was also in Circus of Horrors, a movie I really liked from the early 1960s. Did some TV work, did a lot of film work, and in the 1970s he was making a living doing these kind of horror movies. But in this one, they give him his head and let him play with it. He plays Inspector Calhoun, who's a Cockney inspector of police in the area. He's funny as hell. He's sarcastic, witty. He's having jokes with his co-worker, played by Norman Rossington. And it seems to me, at least, like they gave Donald Pleasance and Norman Rossington some leeway to improvise the characters. And you get this incredible creation, which I would love to have seen as a TV series, of Inspector Calhoun, who's very, very much a class warrior. He's a working class guy. He doesn't like posh people. He wants a cup of tea, and he wants it without a tea bag. He wants a pot of tea. And he's got this beautiful, sarcastic nastiness about him, which really is a lot of fun. There are some really good scenes in there that used to flesh out the pretty thin narrative. The ingenue characters played by David Ladd and Sharon Gurney are a bit naff and a bit kind of ordinary. As Inspector Calhoun investigates, he finds out there's a long history of people disappearing on this train line, and eventually he starts to piece together what's actually happening. Meanwhile, David Ladd and Sharon Gurney's characters are on the train line. They're going through their life. It's all a bit kind of just there to keep a younger audience happy kind of. characterizations until Sharon Gurney's character is kidnapped by the man. Now, I'm not going to go into too many spoilers about the other twist in this one to make it interesting, but the movie does something that really does lift it to another level, and that is it humanizes the monster. He's not just a mad CHUD living underground, cannibalistic human underground dweller. He's actually a more complex individual and quite pathetic and sympathetic in a very, very strange way. That really makes the movie for me, the fact that they humanize the monster. He's lived underground all his life. He hasn't known anybody except himself and his partner. And I'm not going to do any spoilers on that, but there's some kind of tragic circumstances around that as well. And he's more pathetic than monstrous, even though he attacks people and eats them. He really ends up being a not unsympathetic character, and I love that about this movie. It was filmed partly on abandoned underground stations in London, and the locations really make it work. There's some fantastic set dressing to make it really look like it's a place that people have been living in for 80 years underground with no outside contact. And the other thing is there's a really great 7-minute long shot in this movie with some hidden cuts which show the world in which this man lives. And he's never given a name because he doesn't actually have one. The long shot's a beautiful escalation of the horror. It starts out on one thing and it pans around, does a full 360, goes out through a window in a door and out along the train platform. It really is much better than you expect from this kind of film. So if you haven't seen it before, Raw Meat, a.k.a. Deathline, is a definite recommend from me. It's a superb piece of 1970s horror cinema, and I think very, very underestimated. The second movie is more fun than it is horrifying, and I kind of like that as well. Blaxploitation and horror have been mixed together in previous movies to this one. There was, of course, Blackula and Scream, Blackula Scream. There was Blackenstein. And then there was this one about a woman getting revenge on the murder of her fiancé by gangsters using Haitian voodoo. And it is Sugar Hill from 1972, directed by Paul Maslansky, who was the producer on Raw Meat. And it stars Marki as Sugar Hill, a photographer whose fiancé, Langston, owns a nightclub called Club Haiti. Langston gets murdered by a bunch of gangsters led by Morgan, played by Robert Quarry, the guy who played Count Yorga in the Count Yorga movies, and was also in the second of the Dr. Phibes movies, about which I spoke earlier. If you just check it out up here, you'll get the link to that video. And Sugar, of course, is devastated. Her fiancé's been kicked to death at a car park, and she goes to see an old voodoo witch called Mama Maitress, played by Zara Colley, who decides to help her and gets Baron Samedi, the Lord of the Dead in Haitian voodoo, to help her out. Baron Samedi is played by Pedro Colley, who was in a whole bunch of films, including the second of the original Planet of the Apes movies. And in this one, he gets to have a lot of fun. He plays a little bit like the same character played by Jeffrey Holder in the James Bond film Live and Let Die, but he gives it his own twist on there, and he's a lot of fun. So basically, Sugar gets Baron Samedi to get his Haitian zombies. Now, these aren't your fast zombies. These aren't your Romero zombies. These are old school Haitian, slow, shambling, walking dead zombies. And they're kind of made up really interestingly as well. They've got a lot of body paint on them. They've got half ping pong balls for eyes, which give them a certain distinctive look. And they're covered in cobwebs and dust. And to top all of this, they carry machetes. This one has a little bit in common with the Dr. Phibes films, in that we as an audience end up going, okay, how's the next one going to be killed? There are a whole bunch of different deaths in this movie. One of the gangsters gets eaten by pigs. Another one gets killed with a voodoo doll. Another one gets a very terminal massage from a whole bunch of zombie women. And it just goes on and on until ultimately they get Morgan and he dies in quicksand. Now, this movie is pure tongue-in-cheek. It was made on a fairly low budget in 3 weeks in Houston, Texas. There are a couple of continuity errors in it, but it does have something about it that I really enjoy. There are some character actors in it who've gone on to have long and distinguished careers. Richard Lawson and Charles Robinson in particular are a lot of fun in this movie. Marki playing the title character does have a very cool vibe about it. She's got a little touch of the Pam Greer's there, but with her own style. And she really does play it the way it should be played, which is seriously, but with an awareness of the absurdity of the movie itself. And the other thing you get, which is something you get in common with a lot of blaxploitation movies, is really cool suits and clothing. The women's clothing is really cool, the men's clothing is really cool. You've also got a wonderful theme song sung by the originals, and I'll just play a little bit of it now. Supernatural voodoo woman does that thing at night. And so it's got very much that blaxploitation vibe about it, but it's a kind of one-off too. There's not another movie in this genre that plays the same way that Sugar Hill does, and I really appreciate it for that reason. It was really nice to revisit it. So Sugar Hill, it's been released on a Blu-ray, as you can see, by Kino Lorber, a company that's been putting out some really interesting product for a number of years. If you look through their catalogue, you're going to find a whole bunch of interesting cult movies and lesser known serious dramas and things like that. But I've never gone wrong getting a Kino Lorber movie. Being a Kino Lorber Blu-ray release, there are interviews with surviving cast members and the director, and so I kind of like that. Those little extras are not particularly important to me in any movie that I get, but it's nice to have them. So that's my 1970s horror double feature. I really enjoyed both of these movies, and I recommend them to you. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and hitting a like, and letting me know which 1970s exploitation movies you enjoyed. There are just so many of them that I really like, some of which I probably can't talk about on YouTube, but I still enjoy them in the privacy of my own home. Anyway, that's about it this time around. Look after yourselves, stay healthy, stay safe, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Definitely watch some 1970s exploitation cinema, and I'll catch you next time.